The Nine Old Men. Is it Les Clark, Mark Davis, Ollie Johnson, Milt Kahn, Ward Kimball, Eric Larson, John Lounsbury, and Wolfgang Reitherman, and Frank Thomas. These are the Nine Old Men. Basically, they are the creators of the original 12 Principles of Animation. As you can see here, there's lots of characters that are associated with each one of these. The reason I've listed them is so that you can go and check these animators out on your own and find out a little bit more history about them. I think it's a good idea to know as much as you can. There's also other animators that are important as well, as Tex Avery, Chuck Jones, and many other more modern animators, John Lasseter, and Brad Bird, and whatnot, that are doing wonderful work currently. But you need to do a little history, a little checking on this. Now, the Night Old Men were the animators that created the 12 principles of animation. And these principles are not meant to be a checklist, they're meant to be a vocabulary. Basically, what they did is they looked through animation that they were creating at the time, and trying to determine why does one animation look better or is more successful than the next animation, and they all ended up describing it a little bit differently. And so they realized that they needed a language in order to have a standard way of communicating with one another, these concepts, and what they were learning through exploring and making animation happen. And so the 12 principles, again, are not really meant to be a checklist so much as they are meant to be utilized in various degrees in order to bring different character personalities to life. Mickey Mouse, certain principles are being utilized there that would not necessarily be used as much, maybe say in Goofy. Goofy has a big squash and stretch, overlapping action, those types of things that make up his character and are utilized quite a bit and exaggerated even. Whereas Mickey, maybe not so exaggerated, but still has some of those principles. Just various degrees of those principles are being utilized at that time. So, what we're going to do now is we're going to go through a little bit of those principles and stuff. We have two main characters that I'd like to kind of bring up first, though, and that's Frank and Ollie. Um, Frank and Ollie are considered to be the fathers of modern character animation. Basically, what they did is they were the ones that really started to push personality traits into characters and thinking of them in the sense of, say, the Three Little Pigs and whatnot, where you have each character has a different personality, therefore, each character should have different animation. And so they've really pushed for that and have been given credit for some of their accomplishments and inspirations over the years. Brad Bird, film director, directed The Incredibles as well as The Iron Giant, had put them into his films. So you may be more familiar with them than you actually realize. So what I'm going to do here is play a couple of clips to let you know these are Frank and Ollie, little cameos of them in these films.
See that? That's the way to do it. That's old school. Yeah? No school like the old school. What happened here? Go on. Tell them what you saw, Frank. You're not going to believe this, but it was a giant metal man. Does anyone know where to get to a telephone nearby?
Okay, so those are little cameos. So I'm sure that you've seen those two characters before, and you can check them out a little bit more if you would like. You just go to frankandollie.com online and look at some of their history, and you can find plenty of information. The source of the principles of animation you will find in the Illusion of Life, which is a book that Frank and Ollie edited or co-wrote and had edited and published. It is in distribution right now, so you can check that out if you would like. We have provided the chapter 3 of the Illusion Life for you, which is the source of the principles of animation, but I encourage you to look it up on your own. If you maybe your local library has an edition of it, or you can find it in a bookstore or whatnot locally, and pick that up and take a look. And if you like it, it's always a good book to have as a resource along with the other books that you're receiving from for your classes as far as an animator is concerned. So the original 12 principles we're talking about in this podcast. There are a few additional principles. We'll be talking about those a little bit later. But appeal, staging, exaggeration, timing, anticipation, ease in, ease out, secondary motion, pose to pose versus straight ahead, follow through and overlapping action, solid drawing arcs, and squash and stretch. Definitely principles that you need to make note of and you need to know. Okay, so I know that you spent some time on them already, but you can never revisit them too many times, honestly, and really kind of look and see if you can find these principles in your own work as well as other examples from movies, online, anywhere, anything that's animated. Just look for them and try to recognize them, and it will improve your animation skills for sure. The first principle that we're going to talk about is appeal. And appeal is all about the character oozing personality. And so there's a couple of things that you really need to be aware of. Who is your target audience? Who are you trying to connect with? That's really, really important. If you're going to make a character appealing, you need to know who you're trying to connect with and what would relate to them and how they would feel about that. And so personality becomes very important. People search for human traits to connect with. So if they can see those human traits and identify with those, especially emotions, then you're going to see people gravitate towards certain characters. They either root for them, they either connect with them and feel for them, they laugh at them, they laugh with them, they're angry at them, they hate them, whatever. That doesn't matter. Whatever your end goal is, you're wanting it to be, is what you should be shooting for. So design elements become really important as well. You have the look of the character, the emotions that are in the character, poses of the character, and what that tells us about them and how we feel about them, and then the situations that you put those characters in. Those things always work together in order to design something really interesting. If we look down at the Tomb Raider character here and look at her, the Lara Croft character, appealing, yeah, probably to a lot of people. To some people, maybe not. You just have to take a look at that. What age group would that be, trying to hit? Probably 14, 18-year-old boy, maybe even older. In that type of, and maybe even female audiences as well at that point. The Woody character here, obviously appealing to most all ages. We can relate to that. It's a toy. That we had toys when we were growing up and playing with them. We can all relate to that. And he's a good, friendly character. And then the other characters here as well. Definitely appealing in their own rights. Who doesn't like food, right? And so definitely appealing and relatable. Okay, so definitely good design characters and traits. That's what you're looking for. Is making sure that personality is reading clearly to the audience. Staging. Staging is about communication and opportunity. I throw opportunity into the mix there because if you're going to stage something and set something up in order to communicate to an audience, you really have to understand what your opportunities are. If you put a fire monster in a desert, it's not going to be very interesting. I mean, it seems logical. Oh, yeah, it's hot in the desert. Fire monster's hot. Yeah, they go together. But does it bring out interesting characteristics and interesting traits within the character? Does it bring out interesting situations in order to unfold for the audience? Not necessarily. You put a fire monster in an ice cave, and you're going to get something that's way, way, way more interesting because you have conflict. You have something that is of contrast, something that the character has to overcome. We don't know if when the character gets angry and flames up, if that is going to melt the ice, and the ice turns to water, and the water hits the fire monster and it hurts them. Or maybe he can flame up, hot enough in order to turn the ice into steam, and he scalds his opponents, the people that are trying to slay him. So how that unfolds becomes really interesting because we don't know what the outcome is, but there's many, many more possibilities that actually can occur, right? So the environment is important, the character is important, right? And the nature of the character and the situation that unfolds, those all interrelate and work together. For an animator, what we really have to look at is the silhouette of the character. That's our initial thing that we're looking at in order to make sure that the situation is reading clearly to the audience. And obviously the environment and the type of character are important as well. But for the animator, those things have already kind of been determined. So the thing that's left for us to control and look at is how clear is the silhouette? How clear does that silhouette read to the audience? If you look at the Mickey character here, if we blacked him all out so we couldn't see any of the details of his face or anything like that, would we be able to tell what that pose is, and would it read clearly and quickly to the audience? Absolutely. What about the characters on the right hand side, the drawing? If we black that out, took all the details away, would we still be understanding that this character is cupping the chin of this other character, the gesture of the hand holding the glass, and what does that tell us about the character, the posture of the characters, as well as the relationship to the table? Definitely things to be looking at. Usually from a profile, things read quickly and clearly, so we tend to kind of at least go for a 45 or a profile in order to get those types of things to read fast, especially with actions. That's ultimately what we're searching for when we're thinking about staging. If the stage has already kind of been set for us, then we need to really make sure that we're communicating clearly. And so silhouette, reading quickly, and clarity, and pose, and purpose becomes very, very important. Here's an example of staging with communication and simplicity. Okay, this is a real clear example of what is possible with just a silhouette and no details. Okay. Okay, so we don't really need to see any details about the character. All we have to do is see that silhouette, and we can still read what's going on. And the animation communicates quite a bit that way. Now we have a communication with simplicity, but that focuses a little bit more on environment. Environment and situation. And think of the environment as a stage, think of situation can be affected by the environment, how that character will overcome those types of situations.
Having mastered the theories of swimming, let us select some well-guarded modern bathing resort and try our wings, so to speak. First of all, we must learn to dress in the average beach locker. In addition to actual swimming, it is well to remember that as many, if not more, healthful benefits can be derived from relaxing on the warm, dry sand and basking in the health-giving rays of old salt. There are still a few who are foolish enough to eat a hearty meal immediately before going into the water. To avoid the possibility of being stricken with cramps, one should wait at least an hour or more. Cramps, as you know.
Okay, so oftentimes a setting in which you place a character can aid in communicating a more unique situation. Unique situations always win because you have something for the character to overcome. Okay, so just remember that when we're thinking about staging. Exaggeration. Exaggeration helps to bring emphasis to an animation. Basically, can there be too much exaggeration within an animation? Well, absolutely. But what we want to have is we want to have something that brings emphasis to a certain point, makes that point clear. Usually a strong silhouette's involved or a strong arc, as you can see down in the bottom right-hand corner that Tom and Jerry little illustration here, is that the arc, the extreme arc and opposing angle becomes a strong element in that exaggeration, as well as you have the orangutan here in the middle, strong poses, right? And then Sylvester the cat there, where he's like definitely in a strong, extreme pose, right? Really clear and exaggerate. And we want to bring emphasis to that. But you have to realize that sometimes you can exaggerate too much. And then what that does is make everything that is exaggerated feel normal. And so what is exaggerated then? You can only go so far. So you need to be selective with it and kind of look at it in the sense of where do I want attention to be brought, and then maybe you exaggerate maybe a pose or timing or something like that at a certain point in order to bring emphasis to that element within the animation and maintain some variety, maintain contrast. That's really very important when looking at making things exaggerated. Most people think that making everything exaggerated is the way to go, because then it has even that much more life. But then you lose the emphasis, and so everything becomes normal, and then we don't get to see the differences, and that is where it will fail. So just kind of look at it and be selective, and try to pick your choices wisely for your exaggeration. Timing. Timing's a big one. Timing, that takes usually the longest for people to kind of get a feel for, but it's the most crucial because there's mood and there's intention, and there's timing for comedic effect versus emotion, and they're slightly different, and a lot of times they're subtle. A lot of people think that timing in cartoon animation is broad and bolsterous all the time, but actually it's rather subtle. Here's a couple of examples of some timing that you can take a look at. I want you to continue to look at other examples along the way in your own sources, and get a feel for that. It takes some time to understand and get comfortable with. But here's two good examples: one of comedy and one of emotion. Okay, notice that the character's timing changing within the character moves from something that's mildly happy to something that's sad to something that's extremely happy. Towards the end, Luxo's a great example of that. Probably one of the best examples out there. Without a face, without arms, without eyes, but somehow you can still tell what the emotion is. You can still tell what's happening in there, and it's really because of the pose of the character and the timing of the character's actions that communicate those ideas. And that's where it all starts. On the left-hand side here is the comedy version. This is going to happen pretty quick, so just hold your attention here, and I'll play that one for you. Okay, it's a very deadpan, right? But nice rhythm and timing. I chuckle every time I see that, and definitely something where we can a punchline, right? And a timing of that punchline can be funny. But if you miss that punchline, if you miss that timing, then guess what happens? It's not as funny. It's a difference between making you chuckle a little bit and making you laugh so hard that you're splitting your side open. So definitely two examples here for timing. It's something to explore on your own. Okay, anticipation. This is the next principle that really it affects timing to a degree, and because what we're doing is we're making the viewer wait to see the end result. Okay, and there's a couple different types of timing. There's a subtle anticipation of timing, but there's also a longer story anticipation. And people kind of overlook that sometimes. They also look at anticipation as something that just has to be stuck somewhere in order to have it. And what it really needs to be is at the moment, usually it's in the middle of an action where, say, a wind up from Bugs Bunny or something, he winds up and moving to the right, and he holds it with some anticipation, and then he zips out to the left and off the screen. Now, what the technique we use in order to create anticipation is called a moving hold. The actual principle itself is anticipation. Now, why would we want to make the viewer wait to see the end result of an action? Well, it's to create anticipation, to create excitement, but mainly and most importantly, it's to allow the audience to have a moment to imagine what's going to occur. And when you do that, you allow them to be engaged. You're allowing your audience to participate. That is so important. If you don't do that, you're going to lose every single time. I don't care how good your animation is. I don't care how well it's developed and tweaked and refined. If you don't allow your audience to participate in it, then you're going to lose. And this is why. If you have anticipation built in to your animations and you give the audience a moment to imagine what will occur, then if you show them exactly what they imagined would happen, they feel smart about it. They're like, I saw that coming. I feel great about that. I am intelligent, and they feel brilliant, right? But if you show them something that they didn't imagine, something that they didn't see coming, then they're excited about that. They didn't see it. It's a surprise, and that's exciting. And either way, if you give them that moment to imagine what's going to occur, you're going to win. All you got to do is just mix it up, and for the best needs for the animation and the outcome that you're wanting to achieve. Sometimes you show them what they want to see, what they imagined, and they feel great. Sometimes you give them a surprise, and that makes it even more interesting. But if you don't have anticipation built in there, you will lose, because they'll never have a moment to think and actually anticipate and bridge that imagination that we all have. And they'll get bored, they'll flip the channel and move on to something else. So make sure you have anticipation built in. And also that will help break up your rhythm and your timing and stuff in your animations as well. Okay, so here's a couple of examples of anticipation, and we'll watch these as right now.
He's got me dead to rights, Doc. Would you like to shoot him here or wait till you get home? Oh, no you don't. Not this time. Wait till you get home. All right. You're despicable.
Okay, so that was a long and story anticipation. Notice that the action has started, characters walk off, they go inside, a brief moment of time happens, then this gunshot, then he walks all the way back out, and then commences the dialogue to see the end result of that start of that long sequence. So there's a long story anticipation. And we could go even longer than that. Here's an example over here. This is a very subtle one. This is one of my favorites, actually. And you will, I'll go ahead and play that, and then you'll see some very subtle type of anticipation that's built into this animation. It's very beautiful. Very, very nice. Right, when we have that anticipation, right as they're getting eating the spaghetti and their lips touch, there's this brief moment right there before they pull away, and you don't know how each one's going to react. Obviously, the trampy reacts in one way, and Lady reacts in another, and that tells us a lot about their characters and a lot about who they are as characters within that animation. Very beautifully done. Here we go again. and right there, that anticipation right before she pulls away. And beautifully, beautifully done. And you don't see too much animation like that anymore. I like to see more of it, actually. Ease in and ease out. This is the next principle within R12. And this is all about speed and direction. Well, follow through is kind of about that as well, but ease in and out is about change in speed and acceleration in forces, and how we approach those specific points in time. Actions speed up, they slow down, they don't move in a very linear fashion all the time, and this can result in a more spirited result. So we'll see a little clip here from A Gentleman's Duel. Great little section. You're going to see the character raise his hand and bring his hand down on top of this tray to pick up the top of the tray. A nice little ease in action there, where everything else is very fast and has some speed to it.
Allow me. No.
Okay, so when the hand comes down on top of that tray, we get some really nice ease in right in there, where he eases into that scenario. Right there. Great stuff. And then some real fast, exaggerated animation right here. He comes all the way over here and he grabs that and snatches it away. That little snatch right at the tail end. Nice contrast in those actions. But things speed up, they slow down, and it gives you a much, much more spirited type of result within your animation. Secondary motion. Any action that happens because of a primary action is basic definition for the secondary motion. There's also secondary action. Secondary action is more based on acting principles, such as maybe a character scratches their jaw, rubs their neck in order to give a little extra complexity in the emotion and reading of that. Maybe a character changes from being happy to sad. The major emotion change is the primary action. The secondary action would be the tear that rolls down the face. But there's also secondary motion, and these are ways of communicating wind, magnetism, gravity, those types of things. It helps to build and support complexity as well as aids in communicating things that we cannot see. We can't see gravity, we can't see magnetism, we can't see wind, but we can see the effect of those forces on objects. And so here's a couple of examples of that secondary type of motion. Okay, so notice that in Presto here, when the bunny runs past the tablecloth, that the motion of him moving past actually moves the tablecloth as a result of that, as well as early on. We don't see actually what's happening behind the curtain, but we do see the curtain moving. So we know there's a primary action that's occurring, but this secondary action is communicating that there's some forces there. And then this other example over here, we have okay, so obviously here with this type of animation is that when the character pounds on the table, that as a result of the pounding on the table, the actual jar moves, the bottle, and the plate moves as a result of that. So we can see the end result of that force and that motion. The primary motion being the pounding on the table, the secondary motion being the objects of being affected by that. Okay. Pose to pose versus straight ahead. Pose to pose versus straight ahead is a principle of animation that is basically talks about how we go about animating and how we approach that. The most common way for us to go is straight ahead, and that's by starting in the beginning and moving straight through an action as we go. We begin and keyframe along the way, and that can have a lot of spontaneity to it. It can be very nice, but it can also be very dangerous. We can go over frame count, we can go under frame count, we can add too many keyframes along the way. We don't pay attention to any significant point along the way, so everything feels kind of flat or watery. and so it can lose some luster if we're not careful. But we can also go pose to pose. Pose to pose is talking about creating strong situations and creating definite points in time in the framework. So we'd start off with the beginning of the action and establish the end of the action, and then go back in the middle and establish the strong points along the way that tell that story, and then we could go straight ahead or blend things as we want in order to get our motion in place. So here we have a clip. We'll show some pose to pose and some straight ahead. Neither way is wrong. I would prefer for people to start out in pose to pose first and then go straight ahead after that. In the best of both worlds is what you're really shooting for ultimately. But here's an example, and I'll slow this down and break it down after we watch this.
You and your crotch-sniffing lackey will pay.
Okay, so basically what we have here is we have a scenario where we have some really strong definitive points. We have this and that and that, and then we have this point, and then he brings them up, and then he looks forward, and then he puts his arms out, right? Very strong definitive points in time, as we're moving through this. You can see those elements in the story, right? But where we get to this point where we have this foot that just kind of moves forward, it's not really a pose-to-pose scenario. He just kind of animates straight ahead to the end, right? This starts one straight ahead action from here to there. He hits the pedal, he overshoots, he comes back, settles in. And you could go straight ahead with this very easily, right? But this over here, it's not as easy to go straight ahead as it happens. You want those definitive points to read, right? So very clearly, so you establish those in the beginning and then animate in between, whereas again this tail end action is just straight ahead, and that would be something very easy to do. A nice some spontaneity to it, very natural. Okay, so there's a little difference in how to go about animating those, or how you could approach those. Follow through versus overlapping, or an overlapping action rather, is all about speed and direction ultimately. Actions blend. They do not start and stop at the same time. In your animation process, you will have that at a certain point because you're going to set whole poses as you go to keyframe. But then you need to blend those. So you can offset keyframes to blend. You can keyframe in your overlapping action as you go. You can set it in after the fact. There's different ways to approach doing that. But you want to make sure that as actions are moving forward and they change direction, that certain elements within that character want to continue to move on forward in a straight line. And that when you do that, you're going to have follow through. The overlapping action comes in when you're going to blend that animation so that everything doesn't start and stop at the same time. Here's an example from The Lion King for some follow through and overlapping action. Just look at the lay around his neck as well as the grass skirt, and you will pick up these qualities within the animation clip.
What do you want me to do? Dress and drag and do the hula? Wow! If you're hungry for a hunk of fat and juicy meat, eat my buddy over here because he has a treat. Coming down a dime, honest Daisy's fine. All you have to do is get in line. Ah, yank! Yup, yup, yup. Oh, some bacon! Yup, yup, yup. He's a big pig! Yup, yup. You can be a big pig too.
All right, lots of fun. So basically, it's a great example of that. And then you find follow through and overlapping action in your characters all over the place. Just start taking a look at some animation clips and seeing where you can identify those types of traits. Some of the physics that are involved within that principle that you have to kind of remember and take a look at is Newton's first law. Newton's first law states that objects at rest tend to stay at rest, and objects in motion tend to stay in motion in a straight continuous line forever unless some force acts upon it. Okay, so there will be a constant rate of change until some force causes it to slow down. With that force, we really have to look at mass and acceleration. How much energy has been put into moving this mass along, and how much mass does it have? And that's how much force it can generate. So if we have something that has a large amount of mass, say like a Mack truck, we don't have to accelerate it very much, but because it has a large mass, you multiply that even times a small, acceleration, you're still going to get a large amount of force because there's a great amount of mass. And the same thing for the opposite end. If you take, say, like a sniper rifle, like a 50 caliber bullet or something like that from a sniper rifle, it doesn't have to be very big, but when you accelerate it to a high velocity, it can do a lot of damage. So forces. What kind of mass is it that you're animating, and what objects or surfaces it interacting with, and how much force can that give back? Which really you kind of have to look at. Maya's not going to do that for you. You have to determine what those things are, and even if you use Maya's physics engine, that you would have to set up those parameters in order to dictate how much mass, how much static friction, and all those types of things would be involved. But we're just trying to create an illusion here for animation, especially in the beginning. Newton's third law is for every action there is an opposite and equal and opposite reaction, right? So basically, for every action, an energy that's put in and force is put into an object, that object is going to try to give that force back. If it cannot give that force back, it will move or break. And if it can give that force back, then the object that is making the force will absorb that. Maybe it will break, maybe it'll shudder, maybe it'll vibrate, to a stop, like an arrow hitting a log or something. It's not going to just stop, it's going to stop, and then that energy has to get used up somewhere, and it's trying to move forward and it can't. It's been given back, so it's going to vibrate down the shaft of the arrow, and there's no forces on the end, so it's going to vibrate and bend and settle in. Right? So you just have to kind of look at that, start looking at actions in the world and see and dictate what kind of forces are occurring, and then try to create an illusion within the computer. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, where forces come from in our animations and how we can manipulate the graph in order to give acceleration and deceleration a little bit later. Solid drawing. This is a very much a traditional principle, and the traditional principle some people kind of overlook in animation as far as 3D is concerned. But I like to kind of look at it because we still need to think about it. We're not drawing every single frame, and we're not concerned so much about volume with every single frame. But if we do have the ability to squash and stretch a character, if we do have the ability to squash and stretch a pose, something like that within a character, we really want to look at the volume over time. We want to look at the execution of animation over time. We want to make sure that the quality and the refinement level is still there consistently. We want to make sure that the character's emotions and does it look like it's solid and believable within an animation? Does it look like it has weight and mass, and is that consistent over time as far as the overall execution is concerned? That's really what we're thinking about. So it still applies. We just have to look at it in a little different light. I'm going to show you a traditional principle example here, and the reason being is because it's probably one of the best solidly drawn characters I have ever seen. And this is Pinocchio, and he's in the cage, and it's a pencil test, which I find actually more beautiful than the actual final animation. We'll watch it through, we'll break it down here, and you can take a look at this. But it's a great example of solid drawing and all the other principles as well. Wow, it's really quite amazing. If we take a look at this animation and kind of slow it down a little bit, you're going to see some key poses up front. You see that pose there, and that one, and that one, and there, and then it starts. The cage kind of disappears, but the amazing thing is it still looks like he's holding on to the cage. It's tilting. His whole perspective is changing as he steps. He's having to step forward there and try to stay up on that edge as it moves back. Now it's pushing against him. He falls down. He actually steps over to the other side of the cage and holds on to that invisible bar that's not even there, but his hand changes in perspective. Right, he's hanging on the cage there, holding and then hitting. Now the cage is pushing against him. He's walking to the front. He's moving up and down with the cage and the platform. So the drawing's actually translating on the page. He holds and then cowers. Just really beautifully done. It's an amazing piece of animation here, and incredibly difficult. That's just magic. I mean, that's the real stuff right there. So if you can get that kind of thing going on with an animation, even in CG, then you're going to have a solid animation, and it'll be solidly drawn in a sense. Arcs. Arcs are important because they give an organic quality and nature to your animation. They can add weight and make movements and poses more expressive. This example here is Mushu coming to life in Milan, and you'll see that it is the classic ball bounce, and arcs are all very important in its nature. So we'll just take a look at this.
Mushu,
awaken. I live! So tell me what mortal needs my protection, great ancestor. You just say the word and I'm there. Mushu. And let me say something. Anybody who's foolish enough to threaten our family, vengeance will be mine. Mushu.
Great stuff. And there's arcs all over it. And even in the main action of the character coming to life, there's an arc. Boom, boom, boom. There's their bounce, ball bounce. And even when he comes up, he's moving in an arc as he moves up. And when he moves forward to here, you can see the arc actually watch his head drop and then come up right in there. Starts up there, drops down, moves up. And then even over in here when he's moving his arms, he moves backwards and then up into an arc, right? It's that path right there. You can see this big stretch in his chin and everything. And see his whiskers here actually bent in this arc. There's arcs all over in his design, arcs even in the clouds and whatnot. But all of his actions are really dictating that. And it feels very organic and alive for that purpose. Even all the way down to here where his mouth shape is mimicking his body shape and his hand shapes as well. So great piece of animation. Love this as well, Mushu. Great little character. So arcs, definitely kind of think about that. We don't want to go too straight linearly too much in any animations. We want to have that arc and weight and movement, organic kind of quality in it. Now squash and stretch. Squash and stretch will give us what we want as far as visual weight is concerned. Usually we have a volume that with a force is applied upon that volume, and we have a displacement because of it. But sometimes we can't squash and stretch the character in that we can change its volume, say like Buzz Lightyear or something like that. So this example here is Goofy. And sometimes we can squash it like this, but sometimes we have to just focus on squashing the pose, stretching the pose or squashing the pose in order to get a sense of weight. But here's an example of Goofy and our a lot of overlapping action as well and arcs and stuff. But the main focus here is the squash and stretch.
In the chart, we first learn the correct form and mechanics of diving. Observe how the board is set into motion by the springy step of the approach run. Now the crouch is timed to the oscillation of the springboard so as to launch the diver easily into the jackknife, the half gainer, the swan dive, or many others too numerous to mention. Now, together with the chart, let us put these theories into actual practice. Only the analytical eye of the slow-motion camera can capture the grace and beauty of diving. Feather in the breeze, glide smoothly to that masterpiece of motion, the graceful swan dive.
Okay, nice example of squash and stretch and making those types of things happen within a character. Again, if we can't do this with a character by changing its volume, we can do it with its pose, such as say a Buzz Lightyear.